Inside ADX Florence, America's toughest prison. In the quiet desert of southern Colorado sits a prison so secure, so meticulously engineered, that federal authorities have called it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Officially, it's the United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility. ADX Florence. Here, nearly every movement is controlled. Nearly every sound echoes off concrete. And some of America's most dangerous or high-profile federal inmates live in cells designed to keep them isolated for up to 23 hours a day. It is a place built for the individuals the government considers too dangerous, too unpredictable, or too influential to house anywhere else. And today, for the next several chapters, we're going deep inside this fortress, piece by piece, brick by brick, to understand what makes ADX Florence the most restrictive federal prison in the United States. Before we step inside the walls of America's toughest prison, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Beyond the Bars. Your support helps us continue sharing deeply researched, fully factual stories from the world's most hidden places. Setting the stage, why ADX exists. To understand ADX Florence, we have to start decades earlier with a prison hundreds of miles away, USP Marion in Illinois. Following the closure of Alcatraz in 1963, Marion became the new home for the federal system's toughest inmates. But Marion itself soon became a battleground. By the early 1980s, assaults on staff were rising. In 1983, two correctional officers, Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman, were killed in separate attacks by inmates linked to the Aryan Brotherhood. The murders shook the federal system. In response, Marion was placed on permanent lockdown, a model where most prisoners remained in their cells nearly all day. That model became the blueprint for what would eventually evolve into something even more controlled, a facility purposely designed to eliminate the vulnerabilities that made violence possible. By the early 1990s, the Bureau of Prisons set out to build a new kind of prison, a place where escape would be nearly impossible, where inmate-on-staff assaults could be minimized, and where individuals deemed threats to national security or public safety could be confined in near-total isolation. Thus, ADX Florence was conceived. Construction of a fortress. Construction began in the early 1990s near the small town of Florence, Colorado, a region already home to several federal correctional facilities collectively known as the Federal Correctional Complex, Florence. But ADX would be different. Engineers designed the prison with layered security in mind, multiple perimeters, motion sensors embedded in the ground, remotely controlled doors, and reinforced concrete that allows almost no direct contact with the outside world. The facility opened in 1994, costing roughly $60 to $70 million according to reports from that time. One of the most distinctive features is its architecture, angular, almost geometric. Buildings sit in patterns that limit sightlines and movement. Inmates cannot see the mountains that surround the prison unless they stand at certain angles in their enclosed exercise pens. Every part of the compound, from the steel-reinforced doors to the narrow windows, was designed to restrict physical movement, social interaction, and communication, all while enabling staff to maintain total oversight. ADX Florence wasn't built to be rehabilitative. It was built to be containment. Who gets sent here? ADX is not a prison someone simply ends up in. Officially, it's reserved for inmates who meet specific Bureau of Prisons criteria, including a history of serious violence inside prison, an escape attempt or escape risk, leadership roles in dangerous criminal organizations, extensive threats to national security, high-profile inmates whose notoriety poses unique security concerns. The most well-known prisoners at ADX have come from terrorism cases, large-scale organized crime, espionage, and notorious violent incidents inside other federal facilities. But it's important to note, the Bureau of Prisons controls placement decisions, and the full criteria used are not entirely public. Some details remain internal for security reasons. What is publicly known comes from court filings, DOJ statements, and BOP policy guidelines. ADX Florence has at times housed individuals such as Ramzi Youssef. Unabomber Ted Kaczynski. Zacharias Moussaoui. Members of the Mexican Mafia and Aryan Brotherhood. Convicted bombers from various federal cases. High escape risk inmates like Richard Lee McNair. The population changes over time, and not all placements are publicly confirmed. What is consistent is this: ADX is the end of the line within the federal system. When someone is sent here, the government is saying, through policy and architecture, that they pose the highest level of risk. The layout of control. ADX Florence spans a series of connected buildings, each designed for a specific level of control. While the full architectural blueprints are not publicly released for security reasons, the general layout has been described through DOJ documents and media tours. There are several key units. 1. The Special Housing Unit, SHU. This is often where new arrivals begin. The SHU is used for transition, observation, or disciplinary housing. Movement is tightly controlled, and inmates typically remain in their cells for most of the day. 2. The General Population Unit. General population at ADX still means near total isolation. Inmates have single cells, eat alone, and recreate alone. Contact with staff occurs through steel doors and secured slots. 3. The Control Unit. This is considered the most restrictive long-term housing inside ADX. Individuals here may spend 23 hours or more per day in cells designed to minimize physical contact and communication. Many of the prison's most dangerous or high-profile inmates have spent time in this unit. 4. The Range. A long, segmented corridor containing high-security cells. Its architecture prevents inmates from seeing one another, limiting communication. 5. Step-down units. These are transitional units for inmates who have shown sustained good behavior. Here, restrictions may ease slightly: more privileges, increased recreation, or limited group programs. These units are intended to eventually transfer prisoners out of ADX to lower security facilities, though not all inmates become eligible. Throughout all units, the core principle is the same: control through architecture. Windows are narrow, about 4 inches wide, angled so inmates can see only the sky, not the horizon. Doors are solid steel. Ventilation shafts are reinforced. Movement between units is conducted with full restraints, escort teams, and electronic barriers. Inmate interaction is minimal by design. Daily life, the 23-hour day. For most inmates at ADX Florence, the daily routine is defined by extreme structure. A typical day includes 23 hours in the cell. Meals served through a secure slot in the door. Recreation alone in a small outdoor pen, often referred to as a recreation cage, for up to 1 hour. Limited access to showers, usually 3 times per week. Medical checks conducted with physical barriers in place. Educational or religious materials delivered through controlled means. Cells are typically about 7 by 12 feet, containing a concrete bed or steel frame, a stainless steel toilet sink combination, a fixed desk, a small black and white television offering educational and religious programming, a narrow, slit-like window allowing only upward views. Contact with other human beings is restricted. Many interactions occur without direct eye contact. Communication between inmates is limited, though some units have documented cases of prisoners speaking through vents or attempting to send messages. The Bureau of Prisons routinely works to prevent unauthorized communication methods. Some inmates have access to books, legal materials, or correspondence, depending on their security level. For many, days blend into one another, structured, silent, predictable, and isolated. A prison within a prison. Security systems. ADX Florence operates with a multi-layered security system designed to eliminate opportunities for violence or escape. Systems include pressure pads in the ground detecting movement, laser beams and motion sensors along the perimeter, Cameras monitoring nearly every section of the prison. Remote-controlled doors allowing staff to open or close sections without entering. Metal detectors, body scanners, and frequent searches. Reinforced air ducts only a few inches wide. Perimeter towers staffed and armed, with clear lines of sight over the desert. Staff undergo specialized training, especially those working in the control unit. Inmates are restrained during most movements outside their cells, with handcuffs, leg irons, and a tether chain, unless they have advanced through the step-down program. No successful escape from ADX Florence has ever been recorded. Its design is intended to make the possibility as close to zero as physically achievable. Isolation, psychology, and the anatomy of control. Recreation, the cement box. For most ADX inmates, outside does not mean open yards, grassy fields, or contact sports. At ADX, recreation often takes place inside what has been described in court records as a concrete enclosure roughly the size of a small garage. These pens are designed so inmates cannot see other incarcerated individuals, and in many cases, cannot see the surrounding landscape. Some units have slightly different designs, but all prioritize isolation and control. There is no group recreation. No face-to-face interaction. No contact with the general population. Inmates in the most restrictive units are escorted from their cells by a team of officers, typically in full restraints, before being placed alone in a recreation area for up to 1 hour per day. In some units, recreation can occur in indoor exercise rooms, which resemble slightly larger cells with a chin-up bar or pull-up fixture. Whether recreation is indoors or outdoors depends heavily on unit assignment and inmate status. Because movement is so restricted, inmates often describe recreation as the only moment where they can stretch their legs or feel direct sunlight, when outdoor access is available at all. The Bureau of Prisons states that inmates at ADX receive the legally required minimum recreation time. But as multiple federal court filings have documented, the experience of recreation remains radically different from any conventional notion of outdoor time. The architecture of silence. ADX Florence was designed not only to restrict movement, but also to reduce sound, one of the least discussed but most impactful aspects of the facility's architecture. Cells are separated by thick concrete. Doors are solid steel. Vents are narrow, heavily reinforced, and not aligned to allow communication. In court documents, inmates have described the environment as eerily silent. For many, the absence of sound becomes a defining part of daily life. The Bureau of Prisons maintains that communication restrictions are essential for security. Especially in cases involving inmates who have attempted to coordinate violence or criminal activity from inside prison walls. Reducing sound limits the possibility of conspiracies, gang communication, or coordinated assaults. But isolation from noise also becomes psychological isolation. With minimal verbal contact, limited visual stimulation, and near total separation from other people, inmates may go days or weeks without a normal conversation. Researchers examining Supermax conditions across the United States, using publicly available data from multiple states, have found that prolonged sensory deprivation can have psychological consequences. While ADX-specific internal data is not public, broader studies demonstrate that long-term isolation often correlates with heightened stress responses, difficulty concentrating, and in some cases, psychiatric deterioration. It is important to note that the Bureau of Prisons has repeatedly stated that ADX is designed for safety and security, not punishment, and that medical and psychological staff are available on-site. However, access to meaningful treatment is a subject of ongoing debate. What remains clear is that the silence is not accidental. It is structural. And it defines the experience. Special security inmates, the highest risk. Some of the most heavily restricted inmates at ADX are placed under special administrative measures, known as SAMs. These are not ADX policies themselves, but Department of Justice directives intended to prevent individuals from directing violence or spreading sensitive information. SAMs restrict communication, both inside and outside the prison. Inmates under these measures may have monitored or heavily limited legal communication, be prohibited from contacting anyone except approved individuals, have no access to media except through controlled channels, face additional restrictions on mail, phone calls, and physical visits. The Department of Justice has stated that SAMs are used only when reasonably necessary to prevent threats, such as terrorism, espionage, or continued leadership of criminal enterprises. Not all SAMs inmates are held at ADX, but ADX houses one of the largest concentrations of SAMS-designated prisoners in the federal system. Legal challenges have occasionally questioned the breadth of SAM's restrictions, but federal courts have consistently upheld the government's authority to impose them under certain conditions. To be clear, not all SAMS inmates are in the control unit, and not all control unit inmates are under SAMs. But the intersection of these two categories results in some of the most restrictive incarceration conditions in the world. These measures are controversial, but they are grounded in statutory authority, specifically 28 CFR Section 501.3, and require periodic review. At ADX, SAMs create an additional layer of isolation on top of an already isolated environment. Staffing the Supermax. Operating ADX Florence requires a highly trained staff. Although the Bureau of Prisons does not publicly release detailed staffing numbers for security reasons, available data from union statements and news reports indicate that ADX employs correctional officers trained specifically in Supermax protocols, psychologists and medical personnel, intelligence officers focused on monitoring communication, technicians handling electronic surveillance systems, emergency response teams on standby. Staff training includes tactical movement control, emergency extraction procedures, identifying signs of mental health decline, managing high-risk inmates with minimal physical contact. Due to the nature of the facility, officers often have less routine inmate interaction compared to lower security prisons, but the interactions they do have tend to be higher stakes. Several officers have spoken publicly about the unique challenges of working in a Supermax. The monotony, the constant vigilance, and the pressure to maintain perfect procedural compliance. Any misstep, even minor, can create security vulnerabilities. Still, incidents do occur. According to the Bureau of Prisons, assaults at ADX are rare compared to other federal prisons, but not non-existent. Court filings show that inmates have at times used improvised weapons, thrown bodily fluids, or attempted self-harm during interactions with staff. For officers and other personnel, ADX is simultaneously one of the safest and most stressful environments in federal corrections. The mental health debate. One of the most controversial aspects of ADX Florence is the psychological impact of extreme isolation. Multiple lawsuits filed over the years have argued that inmates suffering from serious mental illnesses were improperly housed at ADX, where isolation could exacerbate their conditions. These lawsuits led to increased scrutiny and, ultimately, policy reforms. In 2015, the Bureau of Prisons reached a settlement in a major case involving mental health care at ADX. While the terms did not imply wrongdoing, the agreement required the BOP to enhance mental health screening, treatment, and housing procedures, particularly for inmates with severe psychiatric disorders. Since then, the BOP has created specialized mental health units at other federal facilities, and public records indicate that inmates with significant mental illness are now less likely to be placed at ADX, though the system is not perfect. Psychologists working in Supermax environments across the country, not specific to ADX, have documented increased risk of anxiety, sleep disruption, difficulty concentrating, social withdrawal, self-harm tendencies. But it is important to distinguish between general Supermax research and ADX-specific data, which remains limited because internal evaluations are not publicly released. What is certain is that mental health remains a central topic in the public discussion surrounding ADX Florence, with advocates emphasizing treatment needs and the government emphasizing security demands. The Step-Down Program, A Path Out. Despite its reputation, ADX Florence is not always a permanent assignment. Many inmates enter a multi-phase system called the step-down program, designed to gradually reintegrate individuals into environments with more freedom. The program typically includes increased out-of-cell time, limited opportunities for interaction with other inmates, access to programs or activities not available in the control unit, behavioral reviews determining eligibility for advancement. The step-down process can take months or years, depending on the individual's conduct. After completing the program, some inmates are transferred to high-security penitentiaries elsewhere in the federal system. Others remain at ADX but with fewer restrictions. Federal courts have occasionally referenced the step-down program when evaluating constitutional challenges to ADX conditions, with the government asserting that the program provides a legitimate avenue for progress and review. However, critics argue that the criteria for advancement can be opaque and that some inmates spend years in high-restriction units without clear timelines. Still, the step-down program represents the Bureau of Prisons' primary mechanism for offering change within an otherwise static environment. If you found this deep dive into ADX Florence insightful, make sure to subscribe for more investigations into the hidden corners of America's prison system. Your support helps us continue producing factual, long-form documentaries that cut through myth and reveal what really happens behind the bars. Thanks for watching. Stay curious. And we'll see you in the next one.